The afternoon sun was relentless, beating down on the quiet, manicured streets of the wealthiest part of the city. There was no breeze, just the heavy, still heat of a summer day that made the asphalt shimmer in the distance. Inside the sprawling modern mansion at the end of the cul-de-sac, the air was perfectly cooled, regulated by systems that cost more than most people's homes. The silence in the house was heavy, not peaceful, but thick with a waiting kind of tension. Robert, a man who had spent his life building an empire of steel and technology, stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of the main living room. He wasn't looking at the meticulously trimmed hedges or the sparkling water of the pool. His gaze was fixed inward on his son. Leo sat in a specialized wheelchair in the center of the vast, empty room. At 18 years old, Liye had the face of a boy but the eyes of someone much older, eyes tired of disappointment. 2 years ago, a freak surfing accident had stolen the use of his legs. The doctors had been clear, concise, and utterly devastating. The damage to his spine was permanent. Since then, the house had become a fortress of silence. Robert had thrown money at the problem, hiring the best specialists, buying the most advanced equipment, but none of it could buy back his son's smile or the use of his legs. Leo stared blankly at a tablet propped on his lap, not reading, just scrolling through nothing. The room was sterile, white, and perfect. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit where two people lived their separate lives, divided by an invisible wall of grief. Outside, the world moved on. A young girl, no older than 17, walked slowly along the sidewalk that bordered the estate. Her name was Chloe. She didn't look like she belonged in this neighborhood. Her clothes were dusty and worn, a faded hoodie tied around her waist, and a backpack that looked far too heavy for her small frame slung over one shoulder. Chloe wasn't there to admire the houses. She was thirsty and tired. The heat had drained her energy, and she was looking for a place to rest for a moment before moving on. She stopped near the edge of the property, in the shade of a large oak tree. That was when she saw them through the expansive glass wall. To Chloe, the people inside looked like they were in a fishbowl. She saw the older man standing stiffly, his posture rigid with worry. Then she saw the boy in the chair. She had seen many things on the streets, anger, violence, desperation, but what she saw on the boy's face struck her. It wasn't just sadness, it was a profound, crushing boredom. It was the look of someone who had given up waiting for something to happen. Most people in the neighborhood would have called security the moment they saw a homeless teenager lingering near their property. But Chloe didn't think about that. She didn't see wealth or status. She just saw a lonely boy. She walked closer to the glass. The barrier was the only thing separating them. Robert noticed movement in his peripheral vision and stiffened. He turned his head sharply, his protective instincts flaring up. He stepped forward, ready to gesture for the girl to move along to protect his son from the prying eyes of a stranger. But before Robert could raise a hand, Chloe did something unexpected. She didn't beg. She didn't look away in shame. She smiled. It was a genuine, crooked smile that reached her eyes. She shifted the weight of her heavy backpack and held up a hand in a friendly wave. Robert paused, confused by the lack of fear or agenda in her expression. Inside the room, Leo looked up from his tablet. He had felt the shift in the air, the tension radiating from his father. He turned his head toward the glass. For a second, he stared at the girl on the other side. He was used to people staring at him with pity. He was used to doctors looking at him with clinical detachment. He wasn't used to someone looking at him with simple curiosity. Chloe pointed to the ground next to her, where a discarded plastic bottle lay in the grass. She picked it up, inspected it, and shrugged, tossing it into a nearby bin with a playful arc of her arm. It was a small, mundane action, but it broke the ice. She looked back at Leo and mimed wiping sweat from her forehead, exaggerating the motion to show how hot it was. A sound broke the silence in the room. It was a small, sharp exhale of breath. Leo was amused. For the first time in months, a flicker of interest crossed his face. Robert watched his son, not the girl. He saw the subtle shift in Leo's shoulders, the way he leaned forward slightly in his chair. It was a connection, however tenuous. Robert hesitated. His instinct was to close the blinds, to shut out the messy, unpredictable world. But he looked at his son's face again, and he couldn't do it. Chloe, sensing she hadn't been chased away yet, reached into her pocket. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and a marker. She scribbled something quickly and pressed the paper against the glass. The handwriting was messy, scrawled in thick black ink. It read, "Nice view, looks boring though." Leo read the sign. He looked at his father, then back at the girl. The boredom in his eyes receded, replaced by a spark of defiance. He gestured for his father to come closer. "Dad," he said. His voice was raspy from disuse. "Open the door." Robert looked at the glass sliding door. It was a barrier that kept the world out and the perfect air in. "Leo, I don't think that's a good idea." "We don't know, Dad," Leo interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "Open the door, please." It was the please that did it. It was the first time in a year that Leo had asked for something that wasn't a medical procedure or a new piece of equipment. He was asking for a moment of life. Robert walked over to the panel on the wall and pressed the button. With a soft, mechanical hum, the glass wall slid open. The distinction between the inside and the outside vanished. The cool, conditioned air rushed out, and the warm, dry heat of the afternoon rushed in. It smelled of cut grass, hot pavement, and the distant scent of the ocean. Chloe stood her ground, smiling as the invisible barrier disappeared. She didn't step inside uninvited. She just stood on the threshold, looking at the boy in the expensive chair. "Hi," she said. Her voice was clear and unpretentious. Leo looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the dirt on her sneakers and the fraying straps of her backpack. He saw someone who was carrying her life on her shoulders, yet she stood lighter and freer than he had ever felt. "Hi," Leo replied. "I'm Chloe," she said, tilting her head. "You looked like you could use some company that wasn't wearing a suit." She nodded toward Robert, who was standing awkwardly to the side, unsure of what to do with his hands. Leo let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I'm Leo, and yeah, it's quiet in here." "Quiet is nice sometimes," Chloe said, shifting her backpack. "But too much quiet makes you hear your own head too much. Trust me." Robert watched this exchange, his heart pounding in his chest. He was a man who negotiated million-dollar deals, yet he felt completely out of his depth in this conversation. He cleared his throat. "Can I get you something, a drink?" "Some food." Chloe looked at the billionaire, assessing him. She wasn't proud, but she wasn't greedy either. "Water would be good," she admitted. "It's hot out here." Robert nodded quickly, grateful for something to do. He turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving his son alone with the stranger. For a moment, the two teenagers just looked at each other. The boy who had everything but couldn't move, and the girl who had nothing but could go anywhere. "You want to come in?" Leo asked, gesturing to the vast, empty room behind him. Chloe looked at the pristine white rug and the expensive furniture. She looked at Leo's motionless legs. Then she looked back at his eyes. "Actually," she said, dropping her backpack onto the patio stones with a thud, "why don't you come out here? The sun feels pretty good on your face." Leo looked down at his legs, then at the threshold where the floor met the patio. "I can't," he said, the old bitterness creeping back into his voice. "I can't walk on that." Chloe didn't look away, she didn't offer pity, she just shrugged. "So, you have wheels, don't you? That slab of concrete out here is smooth." "Trust me, I've slept on worse." Leo looked at his father, who was returning with a bottle of water. He looked at the open door. It was just a step away, but it felt like a mile. Robert handed the water to Chloe through the open door. She took it with a grateful nod, cracked the cap, and drank deeply. When she was done, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thanks," she said. She looked at Leo one last time. "Think about it. The sun is free. It's the one thing they can't put a price tag on." She picked up her backpack, turning to leave. "Wait," Leo said. The urgency in his voice stopped her. "You don't have to go. We can talk if you want." Chloe turned back. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the hunger for something real. She dropped her bag again. "Sure," she said, sitting down right on the edge of the patio, her legs dangling into the sunken garden. "I've got time." The glass door remained open. The sterile bubble of the house had been breached, and in that quiet, sun-drenched afternoon, the first crack in the wall of hopelessness appeared. It wasn't a medical breakthrough. It was just a girl, a bottle of water, and a boy who decided, for the first time in a long time, to listen. The routine began the very next day. It wasn't planned or written down on a schedule like the physical therapy sessions Leo used to hate. It just happened. Around noon, when the sun was high and the shadows on the patio were short, Chloe would appear at the end of the driveway. She never knocked on the front entrance. She never rang a bell. She just walked up to the glass wall where Leo was waiting. Robert had left the sliding door unlocked, or perhaps slightly ajar, ever since that first afternoon. He didn't admit it out loud, but he was watching. He watched from the upstairs window, from the kitchen, and from his office down the hall. He saw the way his son's face changed when the girl arrived. The permanent grimace that had settled over Leo's features over the last 2 years began to smooth out. On the third day, Chloe didn't come empty-handed. She walked in carrying a battered deck of cards she kept in her back pocket. The cards were soft at the edges, bent from use, but she shuffled them with a speed that made Leo's eyes widen. "You play?" she asked, dealing out 2 hands on the small table beside Leo's chair. "My dad tried to teach me poker once," Leo said, picking up the cards. "I was terrible." "Good," Chloe said, grinning. "I need the practice, but we're not playing for money, we're playing for stories." "Stories?" "Yeah. If I win, you tell me something about this house. Something real, not the brochure stuff. If you win, I tell you how I slept the night before." "Deal," Leo agreed. He lost the first 3 hands. He told her about the secret room his father had built behind the library, a panic room that nobody ever used. He told her about the Christmas his mother left, how the house had felt like a tomb that day, too big and too empty for just 2 people. Chloe listened. She didn't offer advice. She didn't tell him everything would be okay. She just nodded, her eyes on the cards, taking it all in. Then Leo won a hand. Chloe sat back, looking out at the bright garden. "Last night I slept in the laundry room of an apartment complex a few miles from here," she said casually. "It was warm, the dryer was running, it hums, you know, like a heartbeat. It was the best sleep I've had in a week." Leo stared at her. He had lived his entire life in luxury, surrounded by comfort, yet he spent most nights staring at the ceiling, unable to find peace. Here was this girl finding joy in the hum of a stranger's dryer. It didn't make sense, but it made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: respect. "You're strong," Leo said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. Chloe shrugged, shuffling the deck again. "You have to be. If you aren't strong out there, you fade away. You can't fade away, Leo." "You're too stubborn." "I'm not strong," Leo said, his voice dropping. He gestured toward his legs. "Look at me, I can't even stand up without help." Chloe stopped shuffling. The playfulness left her face, replaced by a serious intensity. She leaned forward over the table. "That's not true. You think strong means walking. Strong means getting up in the morning when you don't want to. You do that every day. You sit here, you talk to me. You haven't given up, you're just stuck." "I'm tired of being stuck," Leo whispered. "Then let's move," Chloe said. She stood up and kicked off her worn sneakers. She wasn't asking for permission. She walked to the center of the open floor space, the cool white tiles smooth under her feet. She stretched her arms up high, her t-shirt riding up to show her ribs. She was thin, but there was a wiry tension in her muscles. "Come here," she commanded. Leo looked at his wheelchair, then at the open space. "Why? Because sitting in that chair is making you soft," she said, not unkindly. "I'm not saying you have to run a marathon, but look at you. Your arms are skinny, your shoulders are hunched. If you're going to be in that chair, you need to be the strongest guy in the chair. You need to be able to pull yourself around, lift yourself up. You need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "Ready for anything. Life changes fast, trust me." Leo hesitated. He felt a flash of the old anger, the anger at the doctors, at the pitying looks, at his own body. But he looked at Chloe, standing there in the sunlight with her hands on her hips, waiting for him. She wasn't waiting for him to fail. She was waiting for him to try. He wheeled himself forward, the rubber tires humming softly on the tile. He braked the chair and gripped the armrests. His heart was hammering. It was ridiculous. He was a grown man. He should be able to move. But the fear of falling, the fear of the pain, usually paralyzed him more than the injury itself. "I can't," he said, his arms shaking already. "Stop thinking about your legs," Chloe said. "They're dead weight. Forget them. Use your arms, use your back. Just lift." She didn't reach out to help him. She stood 3 feet away, giving him space. It was the first time anyone had given him space during a physical challenge. Everyone else hovered, ready to catch him, anticipating the fall. Chloe anticipated the rise. Leo gritted his teeth. He pushed down hard on the armrests. His biceps screamed in protest. He felt the sweat break out instantly on his forehead. He lifted his body an inch, 2 inches. His muscles trembled violently. He held it for a second, gasping for air before collapsing back into the cushion. "See," he panted, humiliated. Nothing. You moved, Chloe said. You got an inch. Do it again. I can't. Yes, you can. Do it again. For the next hour they worked. It wasn't therapy. It was sweat and frustration and the sound of heavy breathing. Chloe didn't touch him. She just talked. She told him about the time she had to climb a fence to get away from a stray dog, how her arms had burned for days, but she made it. She told him that pain was just information. It was the body telling you that you were still alive. Leo pushed himself up again and again. His arms felt like lead. His back ached. But every time he thought about stopping, he looked at Chloe. She wasn't judging him. She was just there, a constant presence in the swirling chaos of his struggle. Robert walked by the open door at one point, carrying a tray of sandwiches and water. He stopped, watching from the corner of his eye. He saw his son, face red and strained, lifting his own body weight. He saw the homeless girl, standing like a coach, calm and steady. Robert set the tray down silently and backed away, deciding not to interrupt. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the floor, Leo was exhausted. He was drenched in sweat, his hair plastered to his forehead. He slumped in the chair, his arms hanging limp at his sides. "I hate you," Leo mumbled, though there was no heat in his voice. Chloe laughed, grabbing a sandwich from the tray Robert had left. "No, you don't. You feel it, don't you? Feel what? Your muscles, they're burning, they're awake." Leo took a deep breath. He focused on his arms, his shoulders, his core. She was right. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel like a passenger in his own body. He felt a dull, aching throb, but it was a living throb. It was blood pumping. It was strength building. He looked up at Chloe. She was eating the sandwich with honest hunger, brushing crumbs off her jeans. She looked like a vagrant, a drifter, someone the world had thrown away. But to Leo, she looked like a lighthouse. "Same time tomorrow?" Leo asked. Chloe finished the last bite and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She looked at him, and for a second the tough facade cracked, revealing a flash of genuine warmth. "I'll be here," she said. "Bring your energy." "We're going for 2 inches tomorrow." She grabbed her backpack, slinging it over one shoulder. She didn't say goodbye. She just gave him a nod and walked out into the cooling evening air. Leo watched her go until she disappeared around the hedge. Then, for the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't reach for the remote to turn on the TV. He just sat there, breathing, feeling the burn in his arms, and feeling, for the first time, a faint. Fragile flicker of hope. 3 weeks had passed since the girl with the backpack first tapped on the glass. The summer was stretching out, long and hot, turning the city into a shimmering haze during the afternoons. Inside the mansion, the air remained perfectly cool, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The silence that used to weigh down the rooms was gone, replaced by the sounds of exertion, laughter, and the constant thud of a backyard struggle. Leo was on the patio. He wasn't in his chair. He was on a thick mat that Chloe had dragged out from the storage room, sweating through a simple t-shirt and shorts. His arms shook as he held himself up in a plank position, his useless legs dragging behind him. It was a posture he hadn't attempted since his accident, and every muscle in his upper body screamed in protest. 10 more seconds, Chloe said, sitting cross-legged on the warm stone beside him. She was eating an apple she had taken from the kitchen bowl, looking casual, but her eyes were sharp, watching his form. "I can't," Leo grunted, his face inches from the pavement. A drop of sweat fell from his nose and darkened the gray stone. "You can. Don't think about the time. Think about holding the world up. Atlas did it. You can do it." Atlas didn't have. "Broken legs," Leo wheezed. "Atlas had to hold the whole sky," Chloe countered, taking a loud crunch of her apple. "You just have to hold up yourself. Easier job." 5 seconds, Leo groaned, a deep guttural sound of frustration. He squeezed his eyes shut and pushed harder. His back muscles rippled under the strain. For weeks, Chloe had been chipping away at the wall of helplessness he had built around himself. She didn't treat him like a patient. She treated him like a training partner. And she didn't let him quit. At the count of 0, Leo collapsed onto the mat, rolling onto his back. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, but a tiny, triumphant smile touched his lips. He stared up at the clear blue sky. It was a good feeling, the ache in his muscles. It felt like proof that he was still in there somewhere under the injury. "Better," Chloe said, tossing the apple core into a bush. "You're getting heavy. In a good way, you're building mass." "Thanks," Leo panted, wiping his forehead with his forearm. I think. A mechanical whirring sound suddenly pierced the quiet afternoon. It was a sharp click, followed by a hiss. It came from the garden beds that lined the edge of the patio. The automated sprinkler system, triggered by a timer hidden somewhere in the estate's vast network of controls, surged to life. Instantly, jets of water shot out from the ground, arcing gracefully over the manicured lawn and spraying directly onto the patio edge. Chloe yelped and scrambled backward, her reflexes sharp from years of sleeping in the open. She hated being soaked when she wasn't ready for it. It was a survival instinct. Being wet and cold on the streets was dangerous. She grabbed her backpack and scurried up the steps to the higher ground of the covered terrace, laughing as she dodged a stray stream. "Leak," she shouted, pointing back at the garden. "We're under attack." Leo sat up, startled. He was soaked. The water was cold, shocking against his overheated skin. He pushed himself up onto his hands, looking around for his wheelchair. It was too far away, nearly 10 feet across the wet, slippery stone. He had moved away from it to exercise, confident he could drag himself back. Now the water was creeping closer, pooling on the flat stone around him. "Chloe," he called out, his voice tight with panic. "The chair!" Chloe stopped laughing. She stood on the dry terrace looking down at him. She saw the wheelchair, separated from them by a minefield of spraying water. She saw the look on Leo's face, the old fear rushing back. The fear of being trapped, of being a victim of his own body and his surroundings. Most people would have rushed down to push the chair to him. Most people would have run to his rescue. But Chloe just stood there. She looked at the water, then at Leo, then at the chair. "Grab it," she said. "What?" "Grab the chair," she yelled over the hiss of the sprinklers. She didn't move to help him. She didn't run to turn off the water. She stood with her hands on her hips, soaking wet but immovable. "It's 10 feet. Crawl to it. Or stand up." "I can't stand up," Leo shouted, anger flashing in his eyes. The water was cold now, soaking through his clothes, making the stones slick and treacherous. He felt small and helpless again. "Don't be stupid, help me." "You don't need help," Chloe said, her voice dropping, losing its playful edge. She leaned over the railing, her face serious. "You just lifted your whole body weight for 30 seconds. You are strong. The ground is flat. The water is just water. It won't hurt you." "I'll fall." "You might," she agreed. "But you're already on the ground. How much further can you fall? Get to the chair, Leo." Leo stared at her. He felt the cold water pelting his back. He felt the humiliation rising in his throat. Why wouldn't she just push him? Was she being cruel? But then he looked into her eyes. He didn't see cruelty. He saw a challenge. She believed he could do it. She was the only person in the world who looked at a paralyzed boy in the spray and saw someone capable of saving himself. He gritted his teeth. He looked at the chair. It was a metal frame with wheels, his cage and his freedom all in one. It was too far to crawl comfortably. The water made his hands slip as he tried to grip the stone. He needed leverage. He needed to be higher. Leo planted his palms firmly on the wet ground. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He remembered the burning in his arms from the plank. He remembered Chloe saying strong means getting up in the morning. He pushed, hard. His arms shook violently as he lifted his torso off the ground. He swung one knee forward, then the other. It wasn't walking. It was a desperate, ugly struggle against gravity. He grunted, a raw sound tearing from his throat. He lifted his hips, dragging his dead weight legs underneath him. He was on his knees. The water sprayed his face, blinding him for a second. He blinked it away. The chair was still so far. "Come on," Chloe yelled, clapping her hands. "Stand up." Stand up and grab it? It was insane. It was medically impossible. His doctors had charts and scans that said his legs were dead wires. But the human body is a stubborn machine, and the will is a powerful fuel. Leo didn't think about nerves. He thought about the chair. He thought about not being wet anymore. He thought about proving her right. He shifted his weight forward. He placed a hand on a nearby stone pillar that supported the terrace railing. He used it as a crutch. With a roar of effort that came from a place deeper than his lungs, he pulled himself upward. His knees locked. It was clumsy, awkward, and shaky. He swayed like a reed in the wind. But he was vertical. He was standing. Chloe went silent. Her hands dropped to her sides. Her eyes went wide. Leo didn't notice her shock. He was focused entirely on the metal handles of the wheelchair. It was 2 steps away, just 2 steps. He released the pillar. He swung his hip, throwing his weight to the right. His leg didn't respond with a reflex, but he forced it to bear the weight by sheer momentum. He threw his other hip forward. His foot slapped the wet stone. One step. He teetered, his balance gone. The world tilted. He felt himself falling. He threw his hands out, flailing for something to grab. His fingers brushed the cold metal handle of the wheelchair. He gripped it with a ferocity that turned his knuckles white. He collapsed forward, not into the water, but into the canvas seat of the chair. He hauled himself up, tumbling half in and half out, gasping for air, soaked to the bone. He had made it. He lay there, draped over the side of his chair, his chest heaving, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he thought it might break through. The sprinklers clicked off abruptly, the cycle finished. The silence returned, heavy and sudden. "Leo!" Chloe's voice was quiet, trembling. Leo pulled himself upright, sitting properly in the chair. He looked down at his legs. They were wet, pale, and motionless. But he had moved them. He had stood up. He had taken a step. He looked up at the terrace. Chloe was staring at him, not with a smile, but with a look of awe that bordered on fear. She had seen him work hard, but she hadn't expected that. Neither had he. I stood up, Leo whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "I saw," Chloe said. She walked slowly down the steps, avoiding the wet patches. She stopped in front of him. She reached out and touched his arm, her hand shaking slightly. "You stood up." Leo looked at his hands. They were trembling, but not from exhaustion. He looked back at the terrace where his father usually watched. The glass wall was empty. Robert hadn't seen it. Nobody had seen it but Chloe. "How?" Leo asked, his voice cracking. "The doctors said." "I don't know anything about doctors," Chloe said softly, kneeling on the dry patch of stone next to his wheel. "I just know you didn't want to be wet." She tried to make a joke, but her voice was too thick. Leo started to laugh. It was a broken, hysterical laugh that bubbled up from his stomach. He laughed until his sides hurt. He had defied the laws of his own body just to escape a sprinkler. It was ridiculous. It was impossible, but it had happened. "We need to tell your dad," Chloe said, standing up. "No," Leo said, grabbing her wrist before she could move. "Not yet." He looked at his legs again. The feeling wasn't back, not really. The movement had been brute force, a puppet master jerking the strings of a marionette. But it was his hand on the strings. "If we tell him, he'll call the doctors. They'll put me back in the machines. They'll poke me and test me." Leo looked up at Chloe, his eyes bright with a feverish energy. "We do it again tomorrow. I want to see if I can do it when I'm not scared of the water." Chloe looked at him for a long moment. She nodded slowly. "Okay, tomorrow. But right now you're dripping all over the expensive patio." Leo grinned, a real, genuine grin that showed his teeth. He grabbed the wheels of his chair and pushed. He was strong now. He could move himself. And for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't just rolling towards a destination. He was rolling towards a future that he and the girl beside him had built with their own 2 hands. The miracle hadn't happened in a lab. It had happened in the spray of a garden hose, driven by nothing but the sheer, stubborn refusal to stay down. The secret didn't stay buried for long. It couldn't. The energy in the house had shifted too drastically. For the next 3 days, Leo and Chloe worked in quiet desperation, stealing hours when Robert was in his office or away on calls. Leo practiced the clumsy, agonizing motion of standing up from his chair. He used his arms to haul his dead weight up, locking his knees into place. It wasn't graceful. It looked more like a construction project than walking, but it was movement. It was defiance. On the 4th afternoon, the inevitable happened. Robert came home early. He had forgotten a set of blueprints for a bridge project overseas, and his mind was distracted as he keyed in the code for the side entrance. He walked into the main hallway, expecting the usual silence. Instead, he heard grunting, a deep, rhythmic sound of strain that stopped him in his tracks. It was coming from the sunroom. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. He thought Leo had fallen. He thought the worst. Robert ran the last few steps and skidded to a halt in the open doorway of the sunroom. The sight before him froze the breath in his lungs. Leo was not in his wheelchair. He was standing. He was upright, swaying slightly, his hands gripping the back of a heavy dining chair he had dragged into the center of the room. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck with the effort, and sweat was dripping off his chin. And there, right next to him, was the homeless girl. She wasn't touching him. She was crouched like a catcher, her hands hovering near his waist, ready to catch him if he fell, but letting him hold the weight himself. "Leo!" Robert's voice was barely a whisper. Leo heard his father. The sound broke his concentration. His knees buckled. He started to collapse. Chloe moved instantly, sliding her shoulder under his arm, taking the brunt of his weight as they both tumbled softly onto the thick rug. Leo groaned, frustrated, trying to push himself back up, but the moment was gone. Robert rushed forward, his hands shaking. Don't move, son. Are you hurt?" "What happened?" He was babbling, reaching for Leo's legs, checking for brakes, his eyes wide with panic. "Dad, stop!" Leo gasped, pushing his father's hands away. He rolled onto his back, breathing hard. I'm fine. Fine, you were standing," Robert shouted, the shock turning into a mix of anger and disbelief. He turned to Chloe, who was sitting back on her heels, looking calm amidst the storm. "What did you do? Did you make him stand?" "He could have broken his neck." "I didn't make him do anything," Chloe said, her voice steady. She didn't flinch at the shouting. She was used to people yelling. "He wanted to get up." "So he got up." Robert stared at her, then back at his son. He looked at the wheelchair, empty and discarded in the corner. For 2 years, that chair had been the center of their universe. Now it looked like a foreign object. This is impossible. The doctors said the nerves were severed." "I don't know about nerves," Leo said, sitting up with a groan. He wiped his face with his shirt. "I know that my legs are dead weight, but my arms aren't, and I can hold myself up. I can move, Dad. Not like before, but I can move." Robert paced the room, running his hands through his hair. He was a man of logic, a man of engineering. Things either worked or they didn't. Bridges stood or they fell, but this was a bridge holding itself up with duct tape and sheer will. "We need to call Dr. Evans. We need to get you to the hospital. Now." "Dad, wait." "No, Leo. This is a medical anomaly. If you have sensation, if you have motor control, we need to know why." Robert pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers fumbling over the screen. Within 2 hours, the house was no longer a home. It was a laboratory. The serene sunroom was filled with equipment. The lead neurologist, Dr. Evans, arrived with a team of 3 other specialists. They brought portable scanning machines, reflex hammers, and needles. The air was sucked out of the room, replaced by the sterile smell of antiseptic wipes. Leo sat back in his wheelchair, looking small again. He hated this part. He hated being the specimen. Chloe stood in the far corner of the room, near the open glass door. She felt out of place, a splash of dirt on a clean white canvas. She clutched her backpack straps, ready to leave. She had done what she came to do. The boy was up. The miracle had happened. It was time to fade back into the city. "Stimulus response in the left quadriceps," Dr. Evans muttered, pressing a pen into Leo's knee. Nothing happened. The leg didn't kick. No reflex. "Try the right." Nothing. "Fascinating." Robert stood by the doctor's shoulder, watching the monitors. "But he stood up, doctor. I saw it." He was vertical for almost 10 seconds. "Muscular compensation," Dr. Evans said, checking the readouts on a tablet. "He is using his upper body strength to lock the joints. It is not nerve regeneration. The spinal cord gap is still clearly visible on the scan. He shouldn't be able to bear weight without spasticity or collapse, yet he is maintaining posture." "So explain it," Robert demanded. The doctor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I can't. There is no medical reason for this. The nerves are not firing. The muscles are atrophied, though less so than I expected. It seems he has been building immense upper body strength. But the ability to balance, that requires a connection to the brain. A connection that, according to these scans, does not exist." "It's not a connection," Chloe spoke up from the corner. Her voice was small, but in the quiet room it carried. Everyone turned to look at her. The doctors looked annoyed at the interruption. Robert looked confused. "What did you say?" Dr. Evans asked, his tone dismissive. Chloe stepped forward, letting go of her backpack. She looked at Leo, then at the doctor. "It's not about the nerves. The wires are cut. I know that." "I've seen wires cut before," she pointed to Leo's head. "It's up here. He didn't stand up because his legs worked. He stood up because he stopped caring that they didn't." The doctor scoffed lightly. "That is a romantic notion, young lady, but biomechanics don't work on willpower. Standing requires feedback loops." "He stood up to get out of the water," Chloe said simply. He stood up because he wanted to reach the table. He stood up because he was tired of sitting. You call it a miracle. I call it not giving up. Leo looked at Chloe. The doctors were treating her like a nuisance, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She was right. The exercises, the card games, the stories, the laughter, it had all been building a new path in his brain, a detour around the broken road. She's right, Leo said. He put his hands on the armrests of his chair. Doctor, put the machines away. I can't show you anything with needles in my legs. Leo, you need to be careful, Dr. Evans started. Help me up, Leo said, looking past the doctor, looking at Chloe. Chloe walked through the line of white coats. She didn't ask permission. She grabbed Leo's hand and pulled. Robert reached out instinctively to help, but Chloe shook her head. Just him, Leo grunted, swinging his weight forward. He planted his feet. He wobbled, his body shaking like a leaf in a storm. The doctors watched in stunned silence. The monitors beeped erratically, but Leo didn't fall. He locked his elbows, then straightened his back. He was standing. He was 6 feet tall again. It defies logic, Dr. Evans whispered, watching the boy's rigid legs. The muscle tone shouldn't support this. It doesn't defy logic, Robert said softly. He was watching Chloe. He watched how she looked at his son, not with the awe of a witness to a miracle, but with the pride of a coach watching an athlete finish a race. He realized then that all the money he had spent, the surgeries, the clinics, the doctors, had all failed because they were trying to fix the legs. They had never tried to fix the spirit. Leo took a breath and let go of the chair. He swayed dangerously. He reached out and grabbed Chloe's shoulder. She steadied him, her hand warm and firm on his arm. "Thank you," Leo whispered to her. Robert stepped forward, his eyes glistening. He looked at the girl who wore thrift store clothes and carried her life in a bag. He saw the answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to speak. He saw the bridge his son had built to reach the world. "Dr. Evans," Robert said, his voice firm, "pack your things." "Mister Thorne, we need to run tests. We need to document this." "We are done for today," Robert said. "You can document it later. Right now, my son is busy living." The doctors exchanged glances, frustrated but powerless against the father's orders. They began to pack up their equipment. The room felt lighter as they filed out, leaving the family alone. Robert turned to Chloe. He wanted to hug her. He wanted to write her a check for $1 million. He wanted to build her a statue. But he saw the look in her eyes. She wasn't looking for gratitude. She was looking at the clock on the wall. It was getting late. "I should go," Chloe said, gently removing Leo's hand from her shoulder. "You guys have a lot to talk about." "Wait," Leo said, panic rising in his voice. "You don't have to go." "I know," Chloe said. She smiled, that same crooked, honest smile from the first day. "But you need to learn how to walk without me holding your hand. It's getting crowded in here." She turned to leave. Robert stepped into her path. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were heavy, gleaming in the afternoon light. "These are for you," Robert said. "Not for the house, for the apartment building down the street. The one I own. The penthouse is empty. It has a view of the park." Chloe looked at the keys, then at Robert's face. She didn't take them. "I didn't do this for a penthouse." "I know," Robert said, his voice cracking. "That's why I want you to have it, not as payment, as a safety net, so you don't have to sleep in laundry rooms anymore. So you can come back tomorrow and make sure he doesn't fall on his face." Chloe looked at Leo. Leo was still standing, gripping the back of the chair, a terrified but hopeful look on his face. "Tomorrow?" she asked Leo. "Tomorrow," Leo promised. "Bring the cards, I owe you a rematch." Chloe hesitated, then took the keys. They felt cold and heavy in her palm, a safety net, a home. It was too much, yet it felt like just enough. She nodded once, a quick jerk of her chin. 2 inches, she said, pointing at Leo. "Tomorrow we're going for 2 inches of steps." Then she turned and walked out the open glass door into the golden light of the setting sun. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sound she left behind wasn't silence. It was the sound of a son standing and a father finally breathing again. The miracle wasn't in the legs. It was in the open door and the space that had been made for hope to walk through.